Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we get into this Friday. Already at the end of the week, and what a busy week it has been as we follow up on everything that the Donald Trump administration has been doing. As I said, hitting the ground running, hasn't stopped, can't stop, don't stop, won't stop. That's the Trump administration as they push forward with their agenda. And we're going to continue on talking about some of those. I do want to take a little bit of a break to talk about affirmative action in colleges, something I didn't get a chance to talk about yesterday because it's a subject that I enjoy talking about as someone who has a degree in human resources management and has done a lot of discrimination work. So it's something that's very interesting to me when it comes to that. And obviously, yesterday we talked about the colleges with Donald Trump signing the order banning trans athletes from women's competitions. And I just had one follow-up on that from yesterday. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but one day after that, after President Trump signed an executive order intending to ban transgender athletes from girls and women's sports, the NCAA changed its participation policy, limiting competition in women's sports to athletes who were actually assigned female at birth. That's the technical term. They're born women, is how we know it. So essentially, he pretty much forced, as we talked about yesterday, he pretty much forced the college's hands in doing that by saying, under Title IX, we will come after you if you allow non-women to compete in women's sports. You will lose federal dollars. And the NCAA quickly changed its policy, making it immediate and applies to all athletes regardless of previous eligibility views. NCAA President Charlie Baker said, "We strongly believe that clear, consistent, and uniform eligibility standards would best serve today's student athletes instead of a patchwork of conflicting state laws and courts' decision. To that end, President Trump's order provides a clear national standard." So it seems like the NCAA president fully backs it. He likes the fact that, hey, this settles the issue, which we appreciate. And like I said, they didn't waste time at all in implementing it. I'm sure you'll have multiple schools and states try to sue afterwards. But, this all kind of started from Kentucky swimmer Riley Gaines, who was a vocal advocate for banning transgender athletes from women's sports. Gaines was at the White House signing ceremony with Trump, we talked about yesterday, along with multiple in the room full of women, as we showed the video yesterday as well. So, again, just another instance of Trump saying he's going to do something, follows through, and then everybody follows suit as well. He gets the movements. People then say, "Yep, Roger that, President. We will abide by that and go forward." Right, and as Mr. Baker said there, it seems to me they appreciate the clear standards. So I wanted to follow up on that real quick this morning. As again, that's how quickly things happen, though, right? So it's like last week, Donald Trump said, "Hey, Mexico and Canada, if you do not strengthen your borders, if you do not stop the flow of fentanyl and people into our country, into the United States, we will put a 25% tariff on you." And everybody's like, "Oh, Trump's going to get into a trade war. We're never going to have trade again. Oh man, what are we going to do?" One day later, they both fold. They both fold and say, "We're going to strengthen our border." Canada says they're going to put $1 billion into it, add more people, add some Mounties if you were. Mexico said the same thing, that they are going to strengthen the border on their side and put Mexican army on the border. So again, just as Trump says, he said, "We're going to get to it, and I'm not afraid to use my extraordinary powers to get it done. And if you want to buck that trend, then let's go at it." Right. So this again, just another instance. Just one day afterwards, like I said, I report on it, and then it's like, "Oh, we'll see what happens. Let's see if they can work something out." No. Trump puts bright line rules, right? The lines in the sand, and therefore people just the very next day end up having to follow that rule, having to acquiesce to what Trump is putting out there, because what Trump's putting out there is the will of the people. and that's exactly what they have been waiting for. But what are we going to get to for? Like I said, we're going to talk about the issue of affirmative action in colleges after the Supreme Court opinion last year. I also want to talk about Trump signing an order in that same regard, sanctioning the International Criminal Court over its trying to charge Benjamin Netanyahu for crimes, even though they don't recognize them. We're going to talk about that. And I also want to talk about a judge temporarily blocking Trump offering a buyout to federal workers. So we're going to talk about that as well, if we get to it. I do want to get to the affirmative action, though, because that's one thing I didn't get to in time yesterday. There's just so many stories that are going on. It's like, again, we have about 40 minutes or so of content that we can put in into an hour or so of with commercials. So it's just so much stuff. It's like rapid fire. We got to try to get to this stuff as much as we can. But so much happens every single day now. Every single day is a huge news story with all of these movements, especially after 4 years of nothing getting done and a president who could hardly walk and didn't know where he was, to a president who is hitting the ground running, hitting on all cylinders, forcing people to and other countries to say, hey, this is America's will, and you will follow it or else face the consequences. And it's just something that we're not used to, this fast pace of things getting done. As always, if you want to call in during the break, number 601-879-0002. As I talk about, if you call in during the break or if you are listening to people on the break, we don't get it on the air because, like I just said, we don't have a whole lot of time on the air, but it's a little bit of bonus content that you get if you watch the live stream. We live stream on YouTube and Rumble, and you can see replays of that on either of those platforms. You can get links to those on regulatorsproductions.com, which is our website, which you can also get links to the podcast if you want to see that as well, which you'll also see also hear, I should say, those commercial calls, as I like to call them. And we really enjoy talking to people during the commercials because we can actually break it out. And again, as I talk about, not subject to the FCC rules, we have to have those conversations, which is also kind of nice. It's a little bit more open forum in that regard. So if you want to call in, number 601-879-0002. We keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to The Full Story on WYAB 103.9 as we get into our first story, I guess story and a half. I kind of talked about the NCAA thing in the beginning. So our story number 1.5 on here, and that is a federal judge yesterday temporarily blocked President Donald Trump's plan to push out federal workers by offering them financial incentives. The latest result for governmental employees who are after this big upheaval that Donald Trump has put on the federal government, one I would say that most people would agree was much needed. The ruling came hours before the midnight deadline to apply for the deferred resignation program, which was orchestrated by Trump advisor Elon Musk. Labor unions said the plan was illegal, and U.S. District Judge George O'Toole Jr. God, the guy's real name is George O'Toole, and that guy really is a tool. God, George O'Toole Jr. What a name for a judge. George O'Toole Jr. in Boston paused its implementation until after he could hear arguments from both sides at a court hearing scheduled for Monday afternoon. He directed the administration to extend the deadline until then. Again, this is more of the singular district judges who can just somehow stop a full president's plan. Still, I still think that issue needs to be challenged. At the very least, I think, okay, they can do it for that small area. You can do it for Boston. But the fact that some judge in Boston can make a ruling that affects the whole country still blows my mind and how the judiciary power works. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said 40,000 workers have already signed up to leave their jobs while being paid until September 30th. She described federal employees who have been working remotely as lazy, saying they don't want to come into the office, and if they want to rip the American people off, then they're welcome to take this buyout. That's beautiful, by the way. I'm telling you that's also what a change for a press secretary. Caroline Leavitt, she ain't afraid to lay it out there. I mean, just like Trump, right? I mean, she's a perfect spokesperson for Trump because she's like, I'm gonna tell you straight up, they're lazy, they don't need to be here, they're ripping you off, we're getting rid of them. Next question, right? I mean, what a nice, what a perfect press secretary, I think, for Donald Trump. So the administration has been ramping up its pressure on employees to leave, sending a reminder on Wednesday that layoffs or furloughs could come next. So a message from the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, said the majority of federal agencies are likely to be downsized through restructurings, realignments, and reductions in force. The email said anyone who remains will be expected to be loyal and be subject to enhanced standards of suitability and conduct as we move forward. Which again, I think most people are like, yeah, I think a federal employee should be loyal to the United States since they are working for said United States, and two, they should also be subject to higher standards. I mean, the standard for a federal employee, I mean, it's almost been a joke with the standards of federal employees. They can just blow off things, not really do much, and get paid a heck of a great salary compared to most Americans who are working in this country, and just show up whenever they want, get the best, get all these benefits, and not really do any work whatsoever. I mean, that's not to say all of them, right? There are some hardworking people in the civil service. Don't get me wrong. I've worked with some of them, but there is a big chunk of them that aren't. A huge chunk, and the hundreds of thousands of people. Well, I don't know how many people. I've said it before. I can't remember off the top of my head how many the federal government employees. But I'd be curious how many of them are actually productive workers. So I was just Googling, 1.6 million people, according to OPM, is how many people work for the federal government. Almost 1.7, 1,693,000. So almost 1.7 million people work for the government. So even 40,000 taking the buyout is not a whole lot if you think about it in the grand scheme of things. 1.7 million work for them. The email also said employees who engage in unlawful behavior or other misconduct will be prioritized for appropriate investigation and discipline, including termination. Democrats and union leaders have said workers shouldn't accept the deferred resignation program because it wasn't authorized by Congress, raising the risk they won't be paid. So this is interesting because you gotta be careful what you ask for. So Everett Kelly, president of the American Federation of Government Employees, a federal union, said it's a scam and not a buyout. So this is the interesting thing. You got to watch out what you say, you got to be careful what you ask for, right? Because right now they're saying, hey, we'll give you a buyout, and it's true. There is a piece to that, right? It's not, and it's not going to work how they think it's going to work, but they're not totally wrong in this regard. In that, right, that Congress has to appropriate funds, and so I would be curious to see what the Trump administration says they're going to pull these from, as they're going to pull it from already appropriated funds, or we do have, the right now the Senate and the House are working on a budget, an actual budget, not a continuing resolution, and they should be getting it pretty soon. As like I said, we got to get this stuff. We got to get these agendas passed, but they got to look at. Is there something else that they have appropriated that, hey, we're taking this out of the federal budget, or I guess you could argue that this is just a continuation of their pay and them not working, which, I mean, I guess they really haven't been doing anyway. Is it just a continuation of pay? So therefore, if it's a continuation of pay, that money's already been appropriated. But that's what they, so that's a legitimate argument they bring up. I'm not going to take that away from them, because I think that's a legitimate argument. Where are these? Is this an already appropriated fund, or is this a non-appropriated fund? If it's a non-appropriated fund money, then it is in fact illegal. But then, well, what's the flip side to that? Well, the flip side is we can just fire them, right? I mean, we don't need appropriated funds to fire them. So you got to watch what you ask for, what you're arguing for, because arguing for this may say, okay, you're right. We don't have appropriated funds. We're just going to just massively fire people. We're trying to be nice. We were trying to be nice and trying to give them some time, trying to give them a few months of pay. But since you sued on it, and you know what, you're not wrong, then you're just fired. We're just going to start firing people in large swath. We try to be nice. You sued us. You pointed out. You made a great point. And we have now reevaluated based on that, and you're all just fired. Thank you. Have a good day. Right? They can do that. That's definitely within the power of the executive, is to fire these people. So you got to be careful what you look for. So Trump put Musk, the world's richest man, in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, a sweeping initiative to reduce the size and scope of the federal government. The original email offering the deferred resignation program was titled "Fork in the Road," echoing a similar message that Musk sent to Twitter employees 2 years ago after he bought the social media platform. And if you can remember that, right? He buys Twitter, and then he fires like half its workforce, if not more. I can't remember the exact number, but he fired a good chunk of its workforce, and Twitter's still running. Twitter hadn't been interrupted. Everybody's still, X is still working. It's still going. It's not had any slowdowns whatsoever. So it's like they were bloated. X, then Twitter, was bloated. They didn't need the number of employees that they had. That's just good business. And that was already a business that was there to make money and had stockholders, right? The federal government has its stockholders are the American people. But you're forced to invest in it, right? You can choose to move your money around for different companies. Like, I don't like how this company's run. I don't believe in its policies. I'm going to move my money elsewhere, and you can do that. Guess what? You can't move your money elsewhere in the federal government. If you want to not pay them, you get to go to jail, right? Or get heavy fines. If you don't pay them, you just get fines. But it's kind of the law that you have to pay them. So it's even more important that it run efficient. And if he could cut half or more of the workers in X, he can cut easily probably half the employees in the federal government, right? And so just something to look at as our and like I said, I'm all for utilizing the military more too for a lot of functions. As we know, recruitment was to a 15-year high in December. Let's start using the military for different domestic functions, which I've talked about before, which we've done in the past. So again, it's just very it's very interesting to see how they are running this around. Scattered protests have sprung up outside federal buildings in Washington, D.C. including Tuesday at the Office of Personnel Management. They're actually protesting. You know, it's like, man, you were really asking for it. If you're out there protesting, and I'm guessing you're not at work while you do that, you're asking to get fired. Like, what are you doing, man? You're just really, really asking for it. Because it's like they do realize that Trump, as the head of the executive, has pretty broad powers in firing people, right? I mean, the Supreme Court has put some limits on very, very top level positions, like you can't fire an attorney general who's investigating you. That came from the Nixon. That came from the whole Nixon fiasco, where Nixon was firing his own attorney general because he was investigating him. And Nixon said, "Hey, I can fire whoever I want, especially members of the cabinet." And the Supreme Court said, "Let's back that down a little bit." But the thing is, these people work for departments within the executive branch, and for the vast majority of them, at least. And therefore, Trump has pretty wide latitude on whether to fire you. And he was trying to be nice, trying to offer a buyout. You want to sue. Trump may come back and they may say, "Hey, this was appropriated here, and this is what it is." I'm like, "All right, that's cool. Buyout legal." But if they come back and say, "No, there is no appropriated funds here," then the answer is there is no buyout, in which case they all get fired. Or two, they wait for the new Congress to appropriate the funds for this. It can be either way. So, or they can say, "Hey, everybody who signed up now, you will get your money once it's appropriated by Congress. Everybody who didn't sign up, it's too late. We put a deadline, and you will not be eligible for that program because the money, we appropriated it for those people who signed up." Because they could argue that too. They could argue that, hey, the email, again, we're going to fund them until September. The email was to see how much money we needed from Congress. We could ask from Congress, like, look, 40,000 people asked for this, and we need money now for 40,000 people to fund their pay through September. Congress, can you give us that money? They could say that, and that would be okay. That sounds legal, and go for it. But these other people, like I said, they could say, "Hey, you didn't sign up for it in time, and so therefore you are with nothing." So sometimes be careful what you ask for, which I think they may learn here. And these people are so stupid, they probably didn't realize that. "Oh, look, the judge stopped it." Yeah, but why did he stop it? What are you arguing here? Is it really something that's going to benefit you? Just because you win in court doesn't mean it will benefit you in the long term. It may, in fact, hurt you. And they're too stupid, especially some of these union workers are too stupid to understand or see that. All right. Next thing I want to talk about, next story I want to talk about is moving to Israel. So President Donald Trump on Thursday, signed an executive order imposing sanctions on the International Criminal Court over investigations of Israel. So neither the U.S. nor Israel is a member or recognizes the court, which issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for what they said was war crimes over his response in Gaza after the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th of 2023. So essentially, they said they wanted to say, "Oh, you've put on too much war." President Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I should say, and we covered that in quite detail. It's really ridiculous that they would charge him. It's like, I'm sorry that women and children were killed when they hide bombs and hostages and other things amongst women and children. When they use women and children as human shields, when they put explosive munitions in hospitals and schools. I'm sorry that they're violating the laws of war, which they don't recognize. And so and it's unfortunate that there is collateral damage in regards to this, but it happens. So the idea that they can also, as I talked about, the idea you can have a moral war is impossible. I've covered this in length in other times, but there is no such thing as a moral war. There's actually no such thing as a legal war either. As I talked about before, a war is by and of itself a breakdown of law. It is the absence of law. In fact, the only enforcement you have in war is, I don't torture your people, you don't torture mine. We do prisoner exchanges because we want our prisoners back, you want your prisoners back. That's how that works. It has nothing to do with law or legal or any of that stuff or crime, because at the end of the day, it's only illegal if you lose. That's the way it works. So the idea that the ICC put an arrest warrant on Benjamin Netanyahu is absolutely crazy. And the order Trump signed accuses the ICC of engaging in illegitimate and baseless actions targeting America and our close ally Israel, and of abusing its power by issuing baseless arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his former defense minister Yoav Gallant. The statement said the ICC has no jurisdiction over the United States or Israel, adding that the court had set a dangerous precedent with its actions against both countries. Trump's action came as Netanyahu was visiting Washington. He and Trump held talks Tuesday at the White House, and Netanyahu spent some of Thursday meeting with lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And we talked about his announcement on Tuesday about taking over the Gaza Strip. The order says the U.S. will impose tangible and significant consequences on those responsible for the ICC's transgressions. Actions may include blocking property and assets and not allowing ICC officials, employees, and relatives to enter the United States. Again, Donald Trump's not afraid to put the pressure on these people. We don't recognize you, but you are hindering Benjamin Netanyahu, because if Benjamin Netanyahu technically travels to another country, they could arrest him, or a country that recognized the ICC, which is most of Europe. They could technically arrest him. That would probably cause a war, honestly, if they ever did that. Just like they have an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. If you arrested Putin, you would cause a nuclear war. So I don't know what you think you're doing, ICC. But essentially, it's like you said. Hey, we're not gonna play this game. We're tired of these people thinking they have something, so we're gonna put a little bit of pressure on them. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to work. So, Israel and the U.S. are not among the court's 124 members, and has long harbored suspicions that a global court of unelected judges could arbitrarily prosecute U.S. officials or even Israeli officials. A 2002 law authorized the Pentagon to liberate any American or U.S. ally held by the court. And in 2020, Trump sanctioned Chief Prosecutor Kareem Khan's predecessor, Fatou Bensouda, over her decision to open an inquiry into war crimes committed by all sides, including the U.S., in Afghanistan. However, those sanctions were lifted under President Joe Biden, and the U.S. began to cooperate with the tribunal, especially after Khan in 2023 charged President Vladimir Putin with crimes. But again, you cannot operate with them at all. And you cannot, if you give them any kind of credence, then you give them legitimacy, right? So you can't give them even a little bit. Sure, Vladimir Putin's a bad guy, but we're not going to give you any kind of legitimacy by recognizing that. Because then we'd open the door if you recognize stuff against us or our allies. And that's just not what's going to happen. The driving the turnaround back then was Senator Lindsey Graham, who organized meetings in Washington, New York, and Europe between Khan and GOP lawmakers. And now Graham says he feels betrayed by Khan and is vowing to crush the court as well as the economy of any country that tries to enforce the arrest warrant against Netanyahu. Which is kind of funny. It's a big turnaround for Lindsey Graham. It's like, oh, I'm going to support it. And then all of a sudden, the tides turn, right? The tides turn on the court. Oh, I don't support it anymore. I'm sorry. I'm going after him, guys. Let's go after the ICC. Did I ever say I was for them? I don't think I ever did. I never said that. I've always been against them. It's like, come on, man. Senator Graham is one of the big-time politicians, and that he'll change whatever is in the wind. And that's a great example of it. So hopefully, hopefully this, like I said, brings them back. This kind of tones down the ICC. Again, they really don't mean much. But I think it's time to take a hardline stance against them and say, you know what, we're not gonna recognize this legitimacy. And we're not only that, we're gonna put sanctions on you. You want to if you want to say Benjamin Netanyahu can't travel to Europe, or you're going to arrest him. Well, if you come to this country, you're not coming in, right? Or we're going to arrest you. We're going to put sanctions on you. It goes both ways. And guess what? Our breath is a lot longer than yours, ICC. So pick your battle. All right, we're going to take another break right here. When we get back, I want to talk about affirmative actions in colleges. So keep it tuned here to The Full Story on WYAB 103.9. If you want to call in during the break, number 601 879 0002. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story on WYAB 103.9 as we continue on to our next story. And in 2023, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Fair Admissions v. Harvard that affirmative action in colleges was and now illegal. So they could not use race-based methods to determine who could be admitted to a college, something or university, something that had been kind of a hot button issue for years leading up to that. And now, after we're a couple years after that decision, the numbers are quite interesting on the actual makeup of the colleges. During it, the elite universities warned of a return to diversity levels not seen since the early 1960s, when college classes only had a handful of black students. And yet, when the numbers came in, several of the most selective colleges in the country reported almost the opposite result. So Yale, Dartmouth, Northwestern, the University of Virginia, Wesleyan, Williams, and Bowdoin all ended up enrolling more black or Latino students, or both. And Princeton and Duke appeared to keep their demographics basically stable. These surprising results, which again is not what people thought would happen, raises two competing possibilities. One is that top universities can actually preserve racial diversity without taking race directly into account in admissions, which would be the best case scenario. The other, which is probably a little bit more likely, is that at least some of the schools are simply ignoring the Supreme Court's ruling. Or in other words, they're cheating, or they're finding ways around it. So finding out that truth will probably require litigation, probably from the same people who did it back in 2023. And so history strongly suggested that the end of affirmative action would change the racial makeup of elite higher education. And when we say elite, we're talking about Ivy League schools mostly, because most other American colleges, most state colleges, not all, right, like University of Virginia or University of California, things like that. But most state universities accept most people, right? They're like, 80% acceptance rate or more. So it's not as much as a difference for them. So in the states that had already banned the practice for public universities, when they banned affirmative action, the share of black and Latino students enrolled at the most selective flagship campuses immediately plummeted. So for instance, at UC Berkeley, minorities made up 22% of the freshman class in 1997. In 1998, California passed its affirmative action ban. That number dropped to 11%. Now, a lot of these schools eventually saw a partial rebound, probably because the makeup of the state changed, but never enough to restore the previous demographic numbers. Something similar happened at many selective schools in the aftermath of the court's 2023 ruling. So at Harvard and MIT, for example, black enrollment fell by more than 28 and 60% respectively. So 28% at Harvard and 60% at MIT. Compared with the average of the 2 years prior to the court's decisions. So it seems that the Harvard and MIT were following that rule to a T, essentially. Whereas if it affected Harvard and MIT, you would expect similar numbers throughout all of these universities, just because they've pretty much had pretty similar diversity practices beforehand. But quite a few institutions defied expectations. So at Yale, black and Latino enrollment actually increased, while Asian enrollment fell by 16% compared with recent years. And Northwestern similarly saw its black and Latino populations increase by more than 10%, while Asian and white enrollment declined. And in the case of the Students for Fair Admission case I just mentioned, that was actually on behalf of Asian students who sued, saying they were being denied in favor of black or Latino students because there was an overrepresentation of Asian students at these universities. So that's who brought the suit in 2023. Also, it's kind of crazy to think that MIT had a 60% drop of black students after that rule. They had some really crazy admission policies for black Latino students to get them in if it dropped that much. But like I said, if it dropped by that much, 60%, for instance, in MIT and 28% at Harvard, you would expect to see similar numbers at a place like Yale. So why isn't the numbers similar for these other colleges? So universities have always been kind of cagey about how they choose to admit students. The secrecy, they say, prevents students from trying to game the system. And in reality, it's them trying to hide the system. They don't want to tell people how they do it, because if they tell people how, then they get sued, just like they did here. And now they're even more likely to be clamming up about their admission policies because they've already lost one lawsuit. They don't want to lose one again. So further, like I said, how exactly they're doing this, they just won't tell anybody. So because there's information gap, people are starting to piece together of how their numbers are so different. So one possibility is that universities such as Yale and Princeton are taking advantage of some wiggle room in the Supreme Court's ruling. So what Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the opinion was that, quote, nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. So this seemed to present an indirect way to preserve a race consciousness in admissions. What we call using something as a pretext in law. We talk about saying, "Oh, okay, we are, we're not going to hire anybody. We're not going to hire anybody in this one zip code, for instance. It's not race based, but 100% of people who live in that zip code are black. So therefore, you're not saying you're not hiring black people, but you are essentially putting a policy that has the same result. That's the same thing here. Is that okay? We're not saying it's on race, but has race played a factor in your life? Have you been discriminated against based on your race? Tell us about that." So a law professor at the University of Chicago showed that 43 of the 65 top-ranked universities have essay prompts that ask applicants about their identity or adversity. And 8 made the addition after the court's decision. So essentially, they're asking race-based questions. They're saying, "Hey, it's not about what race you are, but it's about what race you are." Right? That's what we mean by pretext. Tell me how being black has harmed you. Go ahead. Now tell me. So essentially, that's how they're getting at it. And another theory is that universities have figured out how to indirectly preserve racial diversity by focusing on socioeconomic status, which I think this one is a little bit lesser. Because I've been a big fan of utilizing socioeconomic status in admissions, because I think someone coming from a poor trailer park, a poor white trailer trash, if you will, is just a difficult environment as someone who is coming up from a black ghetto, right? So I'm like, those two students have to work harder normally than the student who gets to go to a prep school, right? They have to get where they are. They've had to had to go through more adverse conditions. Both of them have. And I do think that talks about someone's character, which should be a part of an admissions policy. But again, they're utilizing that potential thing to get around the race-based thing, right? To say, we don't care if you grew up in a trailer park, but did you grow up in a ghetto? Let us know about that, because that's going to make a difference. So in 2024, Yale's admissions department began factoring in data from the Opportunity Atlas, a project run by researchers at Harvard and the U.S. Census Bureau that measures the open mobility of children who grew up in a given neighborhood. It also increased recruitment and outreach in low-income areas, i.e. areas that may be non-white. Similarly, Princeton announced that it would aim to increase its share of students who are eligible for financial aid. So again, using this socioeconomics, not race theory. So Dartmouth announced that it had increased its share of low-income students eligible for federal Pell Grants by 5 percentage points, and Yale has said that last year's incoming freshman class would have the greatest share of first-generation and low-income students in the university's history, which, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's actually a great thing. However, again, utilizing it to say, okay, we only want poor people from this area, which is to me when they say they use the opportunity atlas, right? Again, that's utilizing areas saying, hey, we want people from this area. We're not saying, hey, there may be that one white guy that lives in Martin Luther King Drive in Jackson, Mississippi, right? But they say, hey, that's what we're really looking at. So really, you're utilizing a pretext of area to get around it. And so, and we're running out of time here. I have to go to the next break. But this is just another interesting seeing how, hey, why aren't these people just utilizing race neutral things, right? In fact, race shouldn't even be part of the admissions process. It should be taken out. But I guess I think socioeconomic issues are important, but to make sure these universities aren't using that as a pretext to try to force this other type of racial diversity. When we do need diversity, again, diversity is not a bad word. I've said that before, but diversity means more than just racial diversity. It does mean diversity in background, right? Which I think is even more important than racial diversity, because we want people in a college to bring in different perspectives, different ideas, because that's what betters the learning environment. Same thing with companies. We want people to come in with those diverse ideas, diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, because that betters the company as a whole. But we shouldn't have to force it based on race or gender. All right, we're going to take our last break right here. When we get back, we'll do This Day in History. But keep it tuned to the full story on WYAB 103.9. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back here to the full story. We got to be quick here. Again, this will be on the live stream. You'll miss it on the live air. But on this day, January 7th, 2015, terror struck the heart of Paris as gunmen stormed the offices of Charlie Hebdo, a satirical magazine known for its bold and controversial cartoon. So two masked men, brothers later identified as Saeed and Sharif Kochi, forced their way into the building, opening fire with automatic rifles. In just minutes, they killed 12 people, including some of France's most celebrated cartoonists and journalists. This is for retaliation of Charlie Hebdo's depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. For 2 days, French authorities tracked the killers. Then on January 9th, in a dramatic showdown at a printing warehouse northeast of Paris, police moved in and the Kochi brothers were shot and killed. The world responded in defiance to the attacks with the phrase, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, becoming a rallying cry for free speech. And on January 11th, 4 million people marched on behalf. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. We'll see you again on Monday. But until then, my name is Matthew Bishop, and you've heard the full story.